it's all guesswork, because I'm not actually sure that Mr. Trump knows what's going to come under a Trump administration. So we really do have to sort of look for some of the indicators. It'll depend a lot, obviously, on who his advisors are and what sort of influences. But he is very adept at having two policies in the same breath, and that does make it hard to see the point of. But the general thing, and this comes out of the election process, even before Mr. Trump became president-elect, was the backlash against globalisation. And so Hillary Clinton had already denounced the TPP well before the election occurred, which was perhaps something she would have reneged on afterwards, but was a major statement to have to make in that election because she was a major proponent of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The big issue that we face, and the one thing we do know, is uncertainty. We've just ourselves in CAPA have, with our international transactions, have already been subjected to some fairly significant developments, just because when there is uncertainty, all these transactions which rely on some sort of predictability tend to be postponed. Doesn't mean they won't happen, but it just means you're in a situation where you don't know what you're going to do for the next 6 months or so. All we do know is it's going to be volatile. And the impact of that, of course, is to delay investment decisions, just as it does during an election process. And in that, the result of that, inevitably, is that that slows the economy. And in turn, who is most sensitive to any economic downturns or slowing in conditions? The aviation industry. That's a little, for a very sad day last week. For those of you who know Leonard Cohen, one of his songs includes the words, "There is a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in." And it's my attempt, in fact, to be a little bit positive about this, because it's not all, uncertainty isn't necessarily all about bad. Trump is an agent of change, and with the crack in the bell, perhaps the light can get in and we can see some positive changes too. That's the hopeful aspect of it. Just have a look at the shape of the uncertainty. The GB pound against the US dollar declined dramatically in June when the Brexit vote was held. And you can see the pound holding up pretty steadily, going up just before in the expectation that the Brexit vote would be one to remain in Europe, and then declining down to not very nice levels. In Australia, and I use Australia not because I'm from Australia, but because the Australian dollar is, I think, the third or fourth most heavily traded currency in the world, which is perhaps in a lot of ways a good indicator of risk in the marketplace. On the morning of the election, because it happened in the morning, of course, in this part of the world, a Clinton win was expected, and the dollar shot up to nearly 78 cents against the US dollar. When she lost, it came down almost 2 cents. And then the next day, nobody really knew what was going on, so it rocketed back up. And then we had back to what presumably is more like reality at the moment. We're at about 75 at the moment. What's happened so far? Well, things we do know. We've already seen obviously the GB pound has declined substantially against the US dollar and against the euro. But we've also seen some reductions, not a lot, I wouldn't want to overstate it, but some reductions in the number of services to the UK, both by UK airlines and by other airlines operating in there, in terms of their plans to operate, as well as existing operations. And of course, there has been a bit of a hit to profitability and to the outlook for those UK airlines. At the moment, the ALTA conference is going on in Latin America, the Latin American carriers, and our CEO America is there. And he just sent an email this morning saying that there's a really dark feeling at that conference about the the prospects of travel to the United States, because obviously Latinos were very much the butt of a lot of Trump's rhetoric. And that is just as they were starting to recover. Capacity cutbacks will therefore happen, as undoubtedly will need to happen. There'll be losses as a result. That capacity has to go somewhere. Where will it go? More generally, inbound tourism to the US will decline from a number of markets. Obviously, I don't know if you saw that Gulf Air commercial, but fly to the US now while you still can from the Gulf. It obviously has a really unsettling impact, and it is going to hurt US inbound tourism, which of course is mostly, with the exception of Canada and Mexico, by air. A couple of last things. His entire attitude, obviously his entire history, his experience is eastward facing. It's looking towards Europe, and from that point of view, it'll be very interesting to see just how much importance he does place on Asia, and the usual indicators about where he goes first internationally. You would expect it's probably to Europe, but when he comes to Asia, where he goes and what sort of discussions are happening. And I just saw this morning in the papers Mr. Chic making some suggestions about how we have to be cooperative in future. But it will be difficult because of Trump's rhetoric about China. And one of the issues there is that in the China bilateral, the Chinese airlines are now at the top side of their capacity allocation under the bilateral, which is not open skies, and the US airlines who do have room for upside may well be frozen if there is some sort of need for retaliation by the Chinese government, which will be interesting. And protectionism, of course, in the broadest sense, is always a worry. It has been a worry for the last 2 or 3 years, particularly with what we've seen about the backlash against the Gulf carriers of the United States. The outcome from that could go either way, who knows? And I'm sure future President Trump himself hasn't really addressed that issue at the moment. And just to conclude with this, the biggest, broadest issue, even for something like, well, not even, for something like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a major trade deal, which has been negotiated over 6 years and more, doesn't embrace aviation specifically, but of course the impact of growing trade, liberalisation of trade, on a multilateral basis would have been massive. And you're looking in terms of, say, the next 5 or 6 years in losing 5 to 10% of growth in this market. Not just the US to Asia market, but generically. So, that's my introduction. And let's pick up a few of those points over the next couple of days. Hope you have a great time discussing that. And to kick off that discussion, I'm going to invite Bill Franking from Indigo Partners and Robert Martin from BOC Aviation to come up and join me on the stage and have a little bit of a chat about things. So, gentlemen, if you come with me, please welcome